welcome to The Edge. Well, we're taking in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We're bringing not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Iran's President-elect EBRAHIM RAISI has welcomed the negotiations with world powers aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. It said that they must guarantee national interests. The nuclear deal has been close to collapse since the United States abandoned it and reinstated sanctions 3 years ago. But how will RAISI work on the 2015 deal under his agenda? The European Union has agreed to ramp up sanctions against Belarus following the forced landing of a plane flying over its territory. Further economic sanctions will be considered by the EU leaders when they meet for a two-day summit on the 24th of June. What impact could tougher action against Belarus have? And the World Health Organization says that it is setting up a hub in South Africa to give companies from poor and middle-income countries the know-how and licenses to produce COVID-19 vaccines, in what President Cyril Ramaphosa called an historic step to spread life-saving technology. Could this be a milestone towards equally sharing coronavirus vaccines? So these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Despite the string of attacks that Iran has faced in the recent past, the country's nuclear program has a long history. Our infographic explains. President-elect EBRAHIM RAISI said on Monday that Iran's foreign policy will not be limited by its 2015 nuclear agreement with world powers, pledging to conduct result-oriented diplomacy.
Iran's President-elect EBRAHIM RAISI held his first news conference since winning the country's election. Hardliner RAISI evaluated his possible foreign policy agenda with regional and global powers.
Our people have shown that they resist various pressures, and they must know that the foreign policy of our administration does not start with the JCPOA and will not be limited to it either. We will view interaction with the world as an expansive and balanced interaction in foreign policy.
RAISI, strident critic of the West, will take over from pragmatist Hassan Rouhani in August. Iran seeks to salvage the tattered nuclear deal and be rid of punishing American sanctions that have induced a sharp economic downturn. RAISI's rise is unlikely to alter Iran's negotiating stance in talks to revive the nuclear deal. Iran's hardline supreme leader Ayatollah al-Khamenei already has final say on all major policy. Negotiations have been ongoing in Vienna since April to work out how Iran and the United States can both return to compliance with the nuclear pact. Iran has subsequently breached the deal's limits on enrichment of uranium designed to minimize the risk of it developing nuclear weapons potential.
We will not tie the economic situation and the people's conditions to these negotiations, and we will not allow the negotiations to continue just for there to be negotiations. We will not allow them to weaken, but every summit must be followed by a result. We will be result-oriented, and there has to be a benefit for the Iranian people.
And I'm now joined live from Tehran in Iran by Dr. Mohammad Marandi, who's a Tehran University professor and political commentator. Dr. Marandi, thank you for joining us here again today on The Edge. The remarks that we've just heard from President-elect EBRAHIM RAISI are, I imagine, not a surprise. He's coming up behind the JCPOA. He's saying Iran is on board and the United States should come back to their earlier commitments. Well, what's your reaction to this?
It was expected. First of all, in the debates, his opponents were attacking him, saying that he wants to leave the JCPOA and that he's looking for trouble. He said, no, Iran has made a commitment to the deal, and we will abide by Iran's commitments. So Iran's policy will continue to be supporting the implementation of the nuclear deal, and Iran will wait to see if the Americans are going to abide by their side of the bargain, because what the Americans want to do is they want to continue to keep certain sanctions that they've imposed after the deal was signed that are in violation of the deal. And the Iranians are saying until the Americans remove those sanctions, we can't commit ourselves to implementing the deal. We can't have the Americans abiding by parts of their commitments and then for them to expect Iran to abide by all of their commitments. So Iran will continue to wait and see. This has been Iran's policy since the United States left the deal, and it will continue to be Iran's policy during this transition period. And when he becomes the president, the sitting president, that will continue to be Iran's policy in the future. The United States has always been causing trouble for Iran. Iran's nuclear program has always been peaceful. Iran has shown the international community that the United States has been dishonest by signing on to this deal. Iran gave significant concessions to show the international community that the United States was lying all along about Iran's nuclear intentions. And now it's the United States that's not implementing the deal. So our policy is to remain within the deal, even though we have problems with the deal. I think Mr. RAISI is one of the people who felt that we did not negotiate good enough and that we should have been tougher at the negotiating table. But in any case, a deal is a deal, and we'll commit ourselves to it as long as the other side commits itself.
This is a very interesting position to be in. I'm sure I've asked you this question before, but is Iran using this as a way to claim the moral high ground? So you've just outlined how the US is the one that walked away and the one to break commitments. Is this Iran rightly saying to the world, in this you can trust us, we make a promise, we keep it?
Absolutely. That is definitely a part of Iran's calculations. And I think it has had a major effect because the United States for many years was accusing Iran alongside the Israeli regime, which ironically has nuclear weapons like the United States. And they've been accusing Iran of pursuing nuclear weapons. And then Iran not only accepted a deal, but it accepted a deal that allowed for very intrusive inspections. And the United States, after it signed on to it, it never abided by its commitments. Under Obama, it never did. The head of the Iranian central bank back then said that the Americans are not abiding by any of their commitments that are linked to the Iranian central bank. But in any case, the Iranians committed themselves completely. The International Atomic Energy Agency, time after time after time, declared that Iran is completely faithful to its side of the bargain. And despite the fact that those intrusive inspections were carried out, they found nothing to show that Iran's nuclear program is anything but peaceful. But now that the United States wants to come back in, we see that the IAEA is raising new questions. So I think it's pretty clear that IAEA has always been on the side of the Americans because of its power and its influence. We know that the previous head, according to WikiLeaks, promised the Americans to be on their side on every major issue. And the current head is the person who the Americans put forward as candidate in the first place. But still, the IAEA has never produced any evidence whatsoever against Iran. So right now, the Iranians are saying, look, are you concerned about our nuclear program? Fine. Implement the deal, abide by your side of the bargain, and we will implement our side of the bargain as well. The very fact, I think, that the Americans are stonewalling is because they know the Iranian nuclear program is peaceful. They just want more concessions, which the Iranians say they won't give.
Now, on the flip side, of course, the reimposition of sanctions has come at a tremendous cost to Iran and, more importantly, to the Iranian people who have suffered not being able to get medicines and food and so on and so forth. President-elect RAISI said that Washington must be held accountable for violating its commitments. What does he mean by that, and what realistic expectations might Iran hope for?
Well, it's hard to say. The United States launched a dirty war in Syria. We know that Jake Sullivan, who is now the National Security Advisor of Biden, said in February 2012, according to WikiLeaks, in an email to Hillary Clinton, that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, and we know that ISIS came from Al-Qaeda. We see the United States supporting Saudi Arabia's genocide in Yemen. The United States is imposing the same brutal and barbaric sanctions against Venezuela. They supported a coup in Bolivia, claiming that there was fraud in elections, which turned out to be a lie. The sanctions on Cuba, and right now on Syria, the Caesar Act is aimed at imposing starvation on Syria. They've occupied a part of the country, the Americans, and won't allow the wheat and the agricultural goods to go to the Syrian people, nor the oil that belongs to the Syrians. They're stealing their oil. So the Americans are behaving, in a barbaric manner across the board. I don't know what RAISI means by this, but I think that the very fact that Iran is going to tilt away from Europe and the United States, Mr. RAISI is not going to wait for the Americans anymore. I think one of the mistakes of the current administration, the outgoing administration, is we waited too long for the Americans to abide by their side of the bargain. And I think Mr. RAISI is saying that we're just going to move away. And I think he's going to focus on the global south, East Asia, China, Russia, Central Asia, neighboring countries. But also I think there's a sort of coalition of countries being created that have been facing the brunt of American brutality. And maybe through that coalition of countries, Iran can begin to exert pressure on the United States and its allies.
So, and indeed, RAISI has also talked of a desire to have friendly relations with neighbouring countries. Would that include Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I mean, we have been hearing the Iranians for years saying that Iran is prepared to talk to the Saudis. But now the Saudis have finally changed their language, their tone, and they want to talk with the Iranians. We've had negotiations. We've seen negotiations between the two sides. So the Saudis are under an extraordinarily great amount of pressure. They've lost the war in Yemen. The international community has seen the genocidal activities of the Saudi regime. It's isolated in the region. And I think the Saudis know that if this war continues and this animosity towards all of its neighbors effectively, this could create a lot of trouble internally. So the Saudis want a way out. Iran is willing to provide it a way out, but under no circumstances will Iran negotiate on behalf of the people of Yemen. The Saudis have to give up the war and recognize the rights of the people of Yemen.
And indeed, I think Iran's viewpoint there is that Yemen should find its own way forward without the interference of external countries.
Absolutely, and that's why Iran has been very clear that it's not going to negotiate on behalf of Yemen. Iran has told that very specifically to the government in Sana'a, and Iran has said that to the UN representative, and it has also told the Saudis that under no circumstances will it talk on behalf of the people of Yemen. Iran is not going to make decisions for them, but Iran will continue to support them in their defense of their country against Saudi Arabia. And the very fact that although they're surrounded with the Americans and the American Navy is helping the Saudis carry out genocide and prevent food and fuel from getting into the country, but despite all that, we see that the Saudis have failed in this war, and this shows that the Ansar Allah, or what the Westerners like to call the Houthis, but the Ansar Allah led government, the government that is in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, the very fact that they've been able to withstand this genocidal onslaught, which has been carried out with Western weapons, Canada, France, Germany, Britain, the United States, of course, all of them have been involved in this genocide, and their advisors are aiding the Saudis, especially British advisors are aiding the Saudi Air Force, and now more increasingly the Americans under Biden. We've seen an upsurge in American intelligence gathering in Yemen on behalf of the Saudis. But despite all that, the very fact that the people of Yemen have defeated the Saudis shows that they have popular support among their people. They have popular...
And perhaps now's the time for the countries of the Middle East to find their own path forward without interference, while working in harmony with others, but finding their own course. Dr. Mohammed Marandi, thank you so much for joining me today here on The Edge. Fascinating speaking with you as ever. Thank you. EBRAHIM RAISI's statements in his first news conference as president-elect are not going to reassure many people, whether about policies at home or about Iran's engagement with the outside world. The outcome of the nuclear talks in Vienna will give a first clue about RAISI's foreign policy. Let's now move on from the stretched relationship between Iran and the United States to another stretched relationship, namely that between Belarus and the West. Belarusian activist was detained in Minsk last month after his RYANAIR flight was forced to land by fighter jets. But who is Roman Protasevich? Our infographic has more. The European Union imposed additional sanctions on Belarus on Monday, a response to Minsk's forced landing of a RYANAIR plane last month. The sanctions are being imposed in coordination with the United States, Britain and Canada.
We have adopted today, with respect to Belarus, the largest package of sanctions, listing 86 individuals and entities, and in particular targeting those behind the hijacking of the plane with Mr. Protasevich on board.
On Monday, the EU announced a wave of new sanctions on Belarus in coordination with the US, Britain and Canada, a joint approach praised by opposition figure Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who had earlier met with EU foreign ministers to discuss the situation in the country. The sanctions, a response to Minsk's forced landing of a Ryanair plane last month to arrest a journalist on board, blacklist more officials, lawmakers and ministers from the administration of President Alexander Lukashenko, whose air force intercepted the Ryanair plane flying between Athens and Vilnius on May the 23rd, in what the West called state piracy.
These kind of decisions, because we believe that can help. If we didn't believe it, we wouldn't take it. It's not automatic, it's not sure, but it is a way of putting pressure, and economic sanctions put a lot of pressure. And Mr. Tsikhanouskaya has been asking us to take still more sanctions, to froze assets, to affect the state-owned enterprises which are supporting Lukashenko.
The latest round of sanctions since last year's disputed elections takes the EU's tally of Belarusian lawmakers, officials, judges and military commanders to 166 people, including 78 who were blacklisted on Monday. While the EU hopes that economic sanctions under preparation can hit Lukashenko harder, they are expected to consider provisionally agreed sanctions on oil, finance, potash and tobacco, which were approved by EU experts late last week. Tsikhanouskaya met EU foreign ministers for breakfast talks in Luxembourg on Monday before addressing reporters in Brussels. She called for more Western efforts to punish Lukashenko and press him to agree to free and fair elections.
And now joined from Sofia in Bulgaria by Ruslan Trad, who's a security analyst. Ruslan, thank you for joining us again here today on The Edge. Before we talk about the sanctions, can you bring us up to date? What do we know of the situation of Roman, the journalist who was kidnapped, we can say, as he was flying over Belarus?
Greetings from Sofia, firstly, and thank you for this invitation. It is sadly that we speak again for another bad event, and about Belarus and the situation there. It seems that the situation and the condition of the journalist Roman Protasevich is becoming something like Navalny-type problem for Lukashenko. And actually, we have no clear data what is happening with Roman. In Belarus, we know that the whole information is strictly restricted by Belarusian government. So we have only data leaked by security forces, by any chance, or official data, which is, we saw this edited video cadres, and Roman spoke in defense of the regime in Minsk. So it's not possible to have a clear pure of what's happening with him.
That seems highly manipulated. So,
yeah,
as a response to that, more sanctions are being applied by several countries, described as a pledge to make Alexander Lukashenko's regime run dry. Or what is the aim of the application of sanctions, and is it the right way forward?
The Belarusian regime already claimed that the West is trying to bring economic war and declaring economic war to Belarus. So the government in Minsk is trying to present the whole situation as a Western war against the legitimate government in Minsk to its own followers. This is an expected game from Lukashenko. Sanctions are an expected step. I mean, we expected such a move from the EU, and we are expecting this from the United States and Great Britain and Canada for a few months. But these sanctions are mostly economic oriented, and their aim is to hit the elite surrounding Lukashenko and the closest tier around Lukashenko, the main figures in the government. But this is, how to say, it's a tricky situation because more economic sanctions, it's not by definition successful every time. I mean, with governments like Russia, for example, it is more possible to negotiate something like freeing political prisoners, for example. But Belarus is a more difficult country. I mean, such sanctions are not every time successful as a pressure to one regime like Lukashenko's.
So bringing in as you say, the sanctions are coming from the West. At the end of May, several flights were, the airspace was, the European Union closed the airspace over Belarus. They said that European flights couldn't go overfly Belarus. There was a reaction from Russia to that. Is Russia siding with Belarus, and what sort of reaction can we expect from there?
When bringing sanction active, you should be united with other members of your alliance. In that meaning, the West should be very united and very strong in the words and sanctions and applying sanctions, because only words are not helpful in this case. And actually, they should act in a very direct way. I mean, while we have information about sanctions, in the same time, Western companies are still working with Belarusian companies. So these standards should be united as one front against such a regime. And in that meaning, Russia is the only, how to say, guarantor of security of the Lukashenko himself. In that meaning, it was very surprising to me that few other countries like Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, they actually said that they will applying to this pledge for stricter moves against Belarus. And this is very interesting because Serbia is currently participate in one military exercise in Russia close to the Ukrainian border. So it is very interesting because this camp, Russia, Belarus, and Serbia, we know that these three countries are one of the axes in this alliance. It is not so monolithic, it seems. So sanctions are working in some levels, but the West should be very strong, especially when Russia reacted already.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. Russell and Trad, thank you for bringing us up to date, and we look forward to speaking on a more positive subject in the future. Thank you. Belarus views Western sanctions as a declaration of economic war, and Minsk says that the sanctions will negatively impact the interests of its citizens and warns that it will be forced to take reciprocal measures that could, in turn, adversely affect citizens and businesses of Western countries. The coming days will show if any reciprocal measures are taken. But for now, let's move to our final topic to discuss the World Health Organization's efforts to equally share coronavirus vaccines. Distributing the vaccines against COVID-19 is the most pressing challenge of our time, and nobody wins the race until everyone is protected. Our following infographic shows the importance of sharing vaccines all over the world. World Health Organization has announced that it's setting up an mRNA COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing plant in South Africa in an effort to boost the access to vaccines across the African continent.
The World Health Organization said on Monday that it is setting up a technology transfer hub for producing mRNA COVID-19 vaccines in South Africa, which could start manufacturing doses in 9 to 12 months. WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus made the announcement aimed at boosting access to vaccines across the African continent, where cases and deaths had increased by almost 40% over the past week alone.
Today, I'm delighted to announce that WHO is in discussions with a consortium of companies and institutions to establish a technology transfer hub in South Africa. The consortium involves a company called African Biologics and Vaccines, which will act as the hub both by manufacturing mRNA vaccines itself and by providing training to a second manufacturer called BioVac.
WHO Chief Scientist Soumya Swaminathan said that there were several options on the table, mainly smaller companies and biotechs. Pfizer and BioNTech, along with Moderna, are the main producers of COVID-19 vaccines using mRNA technology. Speaking at the same event, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that through this initiative, we will change the narrative of an Africa that is a center of disease and poor development.
Today is historic, and we see this as a step in the right direction, but it does not detract us from our original proposal put together by India and South Africa that we should see a waiver of TRIPS at the World Health Organization. And we would like the negotiations that are taking place there to proceed with speed, because, as you correctly said, Dr. Tedros, people in Africa are facing a rising wave of infections.
And I'm joined live from Rabat in Morocco by Dr. Azzeddine Ibrahimi, who's the director of the BioNova Research Center. Dr. Ibrahimi, thank you so much for joining us again here today on The Edge. Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, made a two-part statement. I want to take it in two parts. First of all, he said a step in the right direction, and indeed great news for the continent of Africa, which I know you've been looking forward to. So can you tell us what are the implications of this medical hub that's been set up or going to be set up in South Africa?
Well, Andy, thank you very much for inviting me for this great day, actually, because, you know, I was advocating for this kind of initiative for a while now. And just to remind everybody, that was a call of interest that happened actually in April 2021. And what was the deal actually? It was actually to get a combination between a public and private entities and propose a hub that will be collecting all the IPs, collecting all the technology, and helping in transferring technology to medium-sized country or countries that can have some capabilities. So actually there was 25 proposals around the world, and one of them, the first one, was in South Africa, which is a really natural one because South Africa has lots of infrastructure to do that, and was able actually to bring up together three components: the universities on one side, a developer on one side, and by the end, a manufacturer that will be doing that. So the hub will be actually collecting all the tech, the IPOs that he can collect, and helping in Africa to transfer the tech to other countries. And I think a great day, and I think for the vaccination solution on the middle range timing, it will be a great solution.
So in terms of the timing, it's going to take most of the rest of this year, if not into next year, to actually set this up and have it operational. Is that fast enough?
Well, I think we cannot be faster than that, actually. Right. That's the main problem. But I think we are going to go in parallel in two things. One of them will be getting more vaccines to Africa. And the WHO actually said that we cannot get to 10% of the population vaccinated in Africa by September. So that means we still have a need for at least 90% of the vaccines in Africa. So if we can actually manage to get a vaccine manufactured in Africa by next year, that will be great. I think the pandemic will be here for a couple of years, maybe 2 years, because a lot of countries in Africa, and I keep saying that, I think we'll need vaccines for more than 2 years. The other thing that I would like to come back to talk about is the technology. It's great that the choice was the mRNA technology.
And that's the new technology that was discovered by BioNTech, by the Turkish. I have to remind everyone, by the Turkish scientists, German Turkish scientists, and this new technology is very important for the future of medicine in many other ways as well. So if that technology is being taken to Africa, does that mean that will also give them the rights to develop it?
Well, I think what is good about it is just if we get the platform, that will be good because the facility can work for the vaccine. But on the other hand, will help you to have what we call biotech drugs, or can help you with the biosimilars. That's just to let people know the biosimilars are kind of the generics for the biotech drugs. So that's something very important. They are very expensive. They are used in a range of diseases for the cancer therapies, for example. And that's great to have this kind of technology. Maybe what we'll get is a capability and a facility to manufacture this kind of vaccines and this kind of drugs, the biotech drugs, and that's great. The patenting part of it, it will be interesting actually to see how we can manage to get free or a waiver for the patents. I remind everybody for the biosimilars, you don't need a patent because the patent is out and it's in public domain, and you can just prepare and manufacture your biotech drug. On the other hand, if there is a patent, why this South African consortium is very interesting, because beside all what I said about the three components, you have the fourth component, that is the CDC, the South African CDC, that will be helping actually with all the legal and the patenting matters. It's a great, I think, initiative, and I think it's the right step in the right direction.
And of course, this brings, as you're intimating, this brings experience into the universities, it brings experience into the industrial side, it brings experience into the population, which is only good. But that brings me back to the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa made a two-part statement. He said it's a step in the right direction, but he was hoping for something which had been proposed more in line with together with South Africa and India for a suspension of for a TRIPS waiver. That's the trade-related intellectual property rights waiver. So that really takes us to the next stage where the patents are opened. Is that something that we should still be hoping for?
Well, it's true what he said, the president, that is not true. True in the fact that the waiver is very important, but I remind everybody that Moderna, that has the same technology, waived its patent rights since the beginning. It said since the development of their vaccine, they said if someone is willing to use our technology, we have no problem with it. The problem with technology is so simple, but I think the upscaling to the manufacturing part is the difficult part of it, because what you need the adjuvant with it, you need a couple of things that a lot of countries do not have. And I think, and I have to come back what you said, I'm glad that you said it's Turkish technology, of course, because I think, and we are proud of that. What we are saying is just, there is great people, great scientists everywhere. We want to give them the opportunity to do it. And one way to do it is creating this kind of hubs, because we don't want any Turkish person or Moroccan person to go somewhere else to get their vaccine or drug developed.
Well, and it's good that I'm sure medical community has always worked together. It's in your ethos to do that. So unlike some other industries, perhaps, although being very proprietorial of things that have been discovered. But you're up in the north of Africa. Does this introduction of capability to South Africa give you opportunities in your research work?
Absolutely. We just organized last week, actually, the 8th meeting for medical biotechnology in Rabat, and the discussion was about that. So actually what we did, we brought out to the table a couple of companies, Moroccan ones and the Nigerian one, the Egyptian one, and a big company from Europe, actually to discuss that, to have an initiative to produce actually vaccines and to produce actually biotech drugs. I think we need to have independence in a way that we can fight any health crisis or fight any pandemic or epidemic. I think Turkey is playing a big role in that. I think in North Africa, Egypt is working on that. I think Morocco will be working on that. I think we need a lot of initiative in Africa because Africa is 1.3 billion. And I think population that didn't get less than 1% of the vaccine. So it's unfair, and that's the way to fight that is two ways: getting more vaccines to Africa through the COVAX, and I think the G7 did again a step in the right direction, but I hope that it will be not just promises. And the second one is what South Africa is doing and other countries in Africa, creating technological hubs that will bring this technology to Africa, and I'm sure that we can be able. And that's very important to say. I was glad to see the president of South Africa doing it because we need a political will. And that's very important in this kind of initiative. And it's really nice to see him talking about that and to see how important for its country to do it.
Excellent, excellent. It's not only unfair is the word which is often used, but I think perhaps the word which you wouldn't want to use is it's also a little bit stupid to exclude a whole continent from the vaccine program because if the vaccine is continuing in Africa, then it's continuing everywhere in the world because people travel. So really this needs to be cracked down for the good of the people in America, UK, Europe. It needs to be eradicated in Africa to protect everyone, doesn't it?
Well, Andy, you become very good lobbyist for Africa right now, and I'm glad to hear that from you. I think everybody should understand that you can think locally, actually. You can find some solution for local place, but you have to think globally to come out of the pandemic. You cannot do it by yourself, and I hope it's not going to come back to bite us that we are leaving or we left out more than 1 billion person in Africa without any vaccines. As usual, and as I said all the time, these people will be letting the virus multiply, the virus will get mutated, we might get new variants, and it's going to be a variant that could basically escape any vaccines. And in this case, it's going to be playing catch-22, as I say all the time, and we come back to square one. And I agree completely with you. I think, Andy, we should just bring you with us to lobby for us with the rich countries, telling them you will be losing a lot if you leave this country by themselves fighting the COVID-19.
Well, it's all very well for me to be vaccinated, which I have been, but I don't want some variant to come back to beat that vaccine in the future. So it's self-preservation, I assure you. Now, many countries like Turkey, Turkey's just announced today it's entering final stage trials, I believe, with its own homegrown vaccine. This as well is very positive for the future of the pandemic, is it not?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's the positive things from the pandemic that each country is looking to itself, to its capabilities, to the potential that they have, and from it trying to get the right solution for the country. And really, I really am glad that Turkey is doing it. I think Iran is doing it. Cuba is doing it. And Cuba is a nice example because Cuba, it was a political will that created the whole industry of biotech. And I think it's good to have it. And I think Turkey, Iran, Egypt, hopefully Morocco soon will be on the right path to do it. I think this technology is quite simple. The only thing that you can that we will have problem with it is the upscaling and manufacturing. But if we can put together this kind of consortiums between all these countries, it's really feasible, and I'm really glad that COVID came, actually, because it showed that we can do it, and maybe we'll be doing it soon, inshallah.
Well, I'm also thinking of becoming a lobbyist for the research industry. So if you, because medical research, we've suddenly seen how important it is, and we're so grateful to all the work that the doctors and scientists like yourself are doing in the field. Dr. Azadine Ibrahimi, thank you so much for joining us here again today on The Edge. Thank you. The tech transfer hub could make it possible for African companies to begin manufacturing mRNA vaccines. The advanced technology now used in shots from Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna in as little as 9 to 12 months. This development raises our hopes that also poor countries could get the needed medical support to defeat the pandemic. So we've been speaking to our analysts from around the world and had their insights on today's top stories. Let's hear what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions to today's top story shared with the hashtag Iran nuclear deal. So let's see what you've been saying about the Iran nuclear deal on Twitter. Afghanistan Power says Iran's RAISI says the US violated the nuclear deal. EU failed to fulfill commitments. And Jacqueline Roche says blame will go to the departing president, while praise will go to his hand-picked successor. And Mohammed Saidi says lifting of all economic sanctions, re-entering back into the JCPOA, and guarantee that reckless policies like that of Trump must never happen again is the only way forward. And let's now take a look at our video of the day, which shows locals in Guinea who are celebrating after defeating an Ebola outbreak.
La musique, ça va loin, ça va dépasser les frontières vraiment de la Guinée. Et c'est pourquoi je me suis engagée dans ce domaine-là pour sensibiliser mes parents, mes mamans. Dans ce village où nous sommes là, il y a déjà du monde derrière nous. Quand nous sommes venus, on a commencé à chanter. Il y a des gens qui sont venus, vraiment, ils ont manifesté la joie avec nous et ils ont accepté, ils nous ont écoutés à travers la musique qu'on a chantée maintenant là.
Nous sommes là aujourd'hui juste pour venir sensibiliser la population. Nous avions vu que la musique attire la population et c'est en cela que nous sommes venus sensibiliser ce Ebola. C'est très important que l'OMS s'associe à ce genre d'initiation avec les artistes locaux pour vraiment sensibiliser la population.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boyns. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.